Well, good morning, everybody. We're excited that during these IPA calls, which is the income producing activity call, we're also highlighting some leaders who are having some great success in our business and really just a little deep dive into what's going on, what's working, how they're doing things before we kind of start touching on our daily IPA. So, privileged to talk about and introduce Popo Leboy today. Popo lives up in Canada. He has a worldwide business that is happening and taking place right now. And Popo just brings just a great presence. If you met him in Destin, he's just, boy, he just stands out. He is just, you can see why people are attracted to him around the world. So Popo, grateful to have you on as a moderator today. But first of all, tell maybe a quick little background about your history in this industry, and then we're going to kind of dive more into how you're building internationally.
Thank you so much. Great honor to be here, and it's always a big event when there's the IPA. But if you're moderating, I mean, you don't really sleep the same the night before. I don't know how it is for everybody else. Maybe you got used to it, but for me, I mean, I could not get Thursday off my mind. It was kind of there. The 20th, I'm moderating. It was like a big thing. Okay, so in terms of the my experience with the industry, before I kind of talk about where I kind of how I started and where I come from, I just wanted to touch on one quick thing that Brent Palmer spoke about yesterday, how you invest into your team, and how important it is, to give back. And it really brought me back to how I got started here. I got a lot of help from, Bob Budd and then Chris and Joni. And then we got into this Zoom with Todd Rowland that I have met. No, I've never met, but I knew him from back. We shared a same opportunity, maybe like 12, a long time ago, like maybe 17, 15 years ago. So I knew of him, he knew of me, but we never met. And then I met Todd Rowland, and I can say that was for me a shift in terms of my journey for PartnerCo. Like in terms of investing into other people, he saw in me something that only him can really talk about, but he started to invest in me. He poured himself in me in terms of, mentorship, but also just so many other things. So I just wanted to touch on that. It's so key, to give back and to do some of these things, because I was coming from a place of stagnation, not loss of vision, but loss of passion. I was kind of stagnating where I was in my previous business, even though I had a huge network of 10,000 people, pretty much. But no more vision or passion. It was just kind of routine. And what Todd did when he kind of jumped in and took me under his wing in PartnerCo, it allowed me to dream again. It almost like you go from a black and white TV to a color TV again. Now you can see now in color. You can dream again. The sky is now pink again, So it was kind of how I felt, and I still feel. And I wanted just to say that. And I'm always going to say, and I've been telling Todd as well, he's been a destiny helper with regards to, for as far as I'm concerned, a major destiny helper, really. It made a huge difference. So that really counts, that somebody will do good to you, just to receive that goodness. Because sometimes, just like that story in the Bible where King David wanted to do good to a descendant of Jonathan. Jonathan was always good to him, and when he died, David wanted to do good to the house of King Saul. And he searched, okay, is there anybody in the house of Saul that I can do good to for the sake of Jonathan? And they found this crippled guy called Mephibosheth. He was living in the pit of poverty, crippled because he had fallen, and he became crippled. And they said, well, no, bring him. And he said, I'm going to do good to you. You're going to eat at the king's table, for the rest of your life. So it's so vital. And some of us are coming from a place of sometimes desperation. Sometimes you lose vision. And the last 2 years in my life were very tough in terms of just staying motivated. I was always going to be motivated, but it was just a challenging times for me and my family. So meeting Todd Rowland really allowed me to dream again, allowed me to feel that, I can get good breaks, I can have a favor, almost like, okay, favor is back, the good things are back, the goodness is back, so I just wanted to say that it's so important. As leaders, we don't know how we may impact people's lives. But when we do that, you never know where somebody is and how they may feel when you're pulling them from where they were and showing them that it's possible again. So I just wanted to honor Todd for what he did, and it's so key. So now, in terms of how I started in the industry, I didn't know that I would do network marketing. All I wanted was not to be an employee anymore. Nothing against having a job. You know, we need to pay bills. But I just felt that, no, it wasn't my place. I was a very, very dark, employee, I would say. Not, skin is dark, but I was dark. So, yes, always kind of angry, angry to be at work. I know that I deserve more and all that. So I had to figure out a way to leave that environment. So I was also a musician in those days. I was part of a band and we had big dreams. And my dream was, okay, how can I get fired so that I can have EI, insurance, employment insurance. They call it in Canada EI, or you guys know what it is, employment insurance. So this way, because in Canada, they give it for 9 months. So, okay, so I'll have 9 months of EI, and then I can figure out life after that. So, and that was my dream, really. And I tried to get fired and I wouldn't get fired. I would come late at work. I wouldn't get fired. I would get a suspension, but wouldn't get fired. And then finally, I took a leave of absence, and then they called me back to work, and I said, okay, maybe I'm not going to come back. And then I didn't come back. And then they said, if you don't come back, you're fired. Then I didn't come back. And then they fired me. But my concern was, okay, am I going to receive a letter? Because the mention of the resignation letter, the letter of me being let go, my prayer was that they would put a note in there that would not prevent me having, the employment benefits, the insurance. So, and it worked out well. I received a letter and they put the reason was like admin reasons. And so I could get EI. So now I have 9 months now to figure out life. So I was so determined not to go back to work. I was telling everybody I'm not coming back, and then your colleague employees, they always wish, that you're going to come back, you're big dreamer, but you'll see, you'll be back here. That's kind of how they are. But I was just like, no, I'm not coming back here. And I was saying I'm going to do network marketing. I didn't even know what network marketing was. I kind of maybe sold a little bit about it. I was just saying, I'm going to do network marketing and things like that. But I didn't even know really what it meant. And then an opportunity came to me during the 9 months, because my mentality was, I don't want to go back with a resume. For me, it would have represented failure and shame and all that stuff. I was like, no, I can't go back. So I have to find something that will keep me out of the workplace. So then my first opportunity came, the one where I shared with Todd Rowland back in the days. So that first business came, I joined. I heard that people were making money, and it's my big brother who introduced me to it. So I joined, and not knowing really what it was all about. All I knew was that I heard about a lady who made $6,000 in 3 weeks. So to me, I was just like, okay, whatever that is, sign me up. $6,000 in 3 weeks, whatever she did, I'm going to do as well, because it has to work for me, because I'm not going back to the workplace. So I joined and I started getting paid, because I didn't understand that they were placing people under me and stuff like that. So I started to get checks. I attended my first presentation maybe 2 months later. I saw what the business was, and I met Bob Budd. That's my first encounter with Bob. And then Bob sees me, and then he shakes my hand and says, thank God for you being here, because he knew, because I told him I was from Ottawa, and Bob in those days lived in Toronto. And he said, God just answered my prayers. You're the one who's going to open up Ottawa for me. And I was just like, okay, I didn't even know what it meant, but I was just like, okay, yeah, okay, whatever type of thing. And so I started the business. But I struggled in my first, let's say, month. I was not able to do a presentation. I was really struggling, to get it out. It just wasn't working. And I tried to do a presentation with to one of my friends. She was completely confused. Then she said, okay, you know what? Go study your thing again, and I'll give you a chance. We can meet again, and you can try to re-explain to me again. That Saturday, the Saturday of that week, there was a Super Saturday in Toronto. So for me, it's a 4-hour drive. So I try to go with some friends at the last minute, as some of you may, have seen already in the past. Everybody cancels at the last minute. So I found myself driving by myself. At least I didn't want to cancel. Everybody canceled at the last minute. They couldn't come with me. No problem. I took the car. I drove to Toronto, 4-hour drive. I get to Toronto, and it was a super Saturday, and the presentation was great. But then the training, there was this number one income earner coming from Texas who was there in Canada with us. The man spoke, and that day, that was it for me. My birth as an entrepreneur was that day. It happened in that 45-minute segment of his training. Everything he said, almost like I could understand. I was hit by revelation. Almost like the heavens open up, and now you can see. Almost like I felt like I understood the meaning of the sun, the moon, and the creation. Everything became clear to me. I knew that I was going to make it in this business. It was so clear. And the man was speaking, and I was hearing new terms, new terminology, but it felt like I was remembering something I was hearing for the first time. It felt like I was remembering it. It was so clear. And then at the end of the training, I went to him. I said, "Thank you so much." And then he says, "I said, yeah, I'm from Ottawa." And then he jokes. He said, "Are you the king of Ottawa?" I'm like, "No, but if I can apply what you said today, I may well be, one day." And okay, so I leave now Toronto. I'm on my way to Ottawa. I'm like an illuminated guy who just received, a huge revelation, and I'm calling everybody back. I'm like, "I'm coming back from Toronto. I mean, something just happened in my life. This is amazing. I have to meet you again. I'll do the presentation, and you're going to join and everything." And I was just like, that's the way I was. And then I met that friend of mine again when I came back from Toronto. I redid the presentation. I couldn't even stop talking. I was just talking. And then she was just there, round eyes, mouth open like that. And I'd be like, "Who are you? Who is this guy?" This is not the guy that I met a few days ago. So that's how my journey as an entrepreneur started. A training, something that I heard, it clicked, and that was it. And thank God, Bob sent me the MP3 recording of that training. I listened to it. I wrote it, like I did a transcript of the whole thing. I memorized it, and that was my presentation. That's kind of how I did my presentation. I just memorized every single thing that man said. And then every time I started the presentation, I was just, throw that on people, vomit that. That's what I did until the verbiage and everything kind of also became my own and all that. But at first, that's kind of how I did. Yes, so I started to do my own presentations in Ottawa, and we started a movement. People started to come and things like that. I made my first $4,000 for the month, a few months after that. It was crazy for me. I mean, I've never made $4,000 for the month. My income as an employee back in those days was maybe $2,000 for the month. So to make $4,000, it was huge, and then I started to make $4,000 and $5,000 and $6,000, and my income started to. Then we had a movement, and so that's kind of how I started. And then, Bob would come and then help us for trainings and stuff like that. And it's kind of interesting because when we started to explode in Ottawa, something had happened to Bob's team in Toronto, like people had left to go to another company. And then, but because the movement that started in Ottawa, was exploding, so it brought his numbers back up. And then he would, but I never knew that story until one day on stage, he was asked, what was one of his, toughest times in the business, and then he told that story about how his business went down, and how in the midst of all that chaos, a leader emerged, and it was me. And then he started to now work with me and stuff. So that day when he shared that story, it kind of told me, I'm like, okay, now I know why Bob loves me so much. He never told me, I mean, anyway, so that's kind of how we started in the industry. That's my start. We're talking about 2008. That was my beginning.
A couple of things, Popo. So this is great. First of all, don't burn bridges, right? Don't burn bridges with people because he had that relationship with the buds at the previous company, that allowed him having a good relationship to join our company now, right? Go to events, right? If Popo does not go to that event, he's not going to get the message. He's not going to get the fire that he came back with that was inside of him, just burning and excitement and sharing. So when we tell, we all time people, you got to go to events. You got people, yeah, you've got to go to an event.
There's always, that happened for us at an event, and here we were kind of vacillating back and forth. Are we doing it? Are we doing, And at an event, we decided. I still remember that day so clearly, just like you do. It just something spoke, and I've talked to so many leaders, and leaders are made at events, you guys. If you don't go to an event or you've never been to an event yet, please get to one, because there is something that's going to speak to you. It might not be that event, but it might be the next, and you'll know it. It just, like, I don't know, this fire just comes in you and you're just like, I am not looking back. I am going forward. And then that power and that passion just comes out to you so that you can go lead others. And that's what happens at events.
Yeah, and Popo had every reason, right, just to not make that trip. After everyone bailed on you, you're like, I would make a 4-hour drive by myself one way, but you say, what, I'm going to make that commitment. And sometimes we get afraid because we don't have someone there to hold our hand along the way. And sometimes we just got to take that leap of faith and get out there and go. So that's exciting, Popo. Okay, so you've only really been with our company since the fall. I think you met with the leaders with their ownership in Puerto Rico in November. But you've been building an international team. So for people who have that desire to build internationally, what are some ideas, some tips that you would share with them to try to build internationally?
A lot to share there, really, when it comes to building internationally. And by the grace of God, if one day I have an opportunity to do like a whole segment, like a whole training, there's so much to share. But I'll try to compress that as much as I can. My story in terms of international is a very interesting story. It's a little bit the story of my life, in the sense that my dad was a diplomat. And so early on, I started life in airplanes and changing countries. So like I lived in Italy for a little bit with my parents, and I spoke Italian when I was a little. We lived in Austria, so I spoke a little bit of German then back in the days. We lived in Switzerland, and then we lived in the States as well. I grew up in New York City. We lived a little bit in Africa. Then we went to Belgium, and then one of the countries that really impacted me was Romania. Believe it or not, I lived in Romania during the communist era. Where they still had the militia, the police, so everywhere, and checking and all that. But we were diplomats, of course. It was different for us. So I lived in Romania. And I'm very familiar with the Eastern European culture. So all of that, always put me in an environment where my best friends as a diplomat's child or were other diplomats' kids. Like one of my best friends was my dad was an ambassador for Congo for Zaire in those days. So like one of my best friends was the daughter of the ambassador of Costa Rica, and then another friend of mine was from Algeria, and then Italy, and another friend of mine from Peru, and then Uruguay. So it was kind of like that. I grew up with all these nationalities based on the different countries I would be living in. But because of the status of my parents being diplomats, the environment around me was always international. One of my best friends was from Yugoslavia, and then another best friend of mine from China. So that's how I grew up. So, and in the early days, it always felt like, well, okay, maybe I'll be a diplomat like my dad as well. Maybe one day I'll be an ambassador too. That's how a lot of children, kind of follow the path of their parents. But even though I didn't end up being a diplomat or in the political realm, somehow network marketing offered me an international platform, where now the upbringing of all these cultures and nations and all that is now, coming out. So that's kind of how I find myself, being always attracted and seeing the world with the worldview that I have, which is just my upbringing. So when you now connect that to just, I want to jump into now another segment. There's something that many companies maybe haven't tapped into, and it's kind of a little bit of what I told the founders when I met them in Puerto Rico, is that there's one thing called the immigrant market, the ethnic marketing, immigrant market. It's a huge market in a sense that if network marketing can tap into that, it's the gateway to entering any country, any nation. Like, can you imagine that I have one of my team members from the UK, who's just about to enroll her best friend who lives in Singapore. But how can that connection even be thought of? But they're from the same country. And because of the African immigration kind of all over the world, you find people everywhere. Like Lucy was asking me the other day, who do you have in Australia? Because I'm going to Australia. Do you have a team? I'm like, not yet, but we will at some point. I just spoke it like by faith. And then a few days later, a leader in my team who's from Saskatchewan, Canada, calls me and says, oh, there are 2 churches in Australia. And some of my friends are going to these 2 churches and they want to join in the business. Just like that, And again, who are these people in Australia? Same country. See? So it's almost like there's that immigrant, network that is a global network. You will find people from the same nationalities and they are all over the world. Like, for example, I've had in the past a huge Filipino team. But a Filipino team where they were all over the US, all over Canada, all over. I mean, it's almost like, okay, you couldn't find a country where you wouldn't find somebody from the Philippines. So you find one, and then you get into the network, and then they start to now, get you into the countries where they have their cousins and relatives and all that. It's a huge market. And even from outside of network marketing, if you look at what the immigrant market does, the immigrant economy, we can call it the immigrant economy, they send stuff, goods and stuff back home all the time. That's why you have all these agencies that do shipping and all that, because immigrants, wherever they live, they're always going to have merchandise and stuff and goods and stuff sending back home. It's a huge market, and it's huge transfers of money and goods always going back from wherever they are to back home. So now when network marketing taps into that, that's kind of how overnight, we are in Denmark and Sweden and Norway and Finland and the UK, Spain now, Netherlands, Belgium, France. Yeah, that's kind of where we are now, and then, Canada and USA as well. And now Singapore soon to come, Australia as well soon to come, and we also have South Africa also, that's also going to be part of it, anytime soon. So that's kind of how we find ourselves overnight in all these countries because of that immigrant market, which is huge. So when you kind of tap into it, it'll be the gateway to getting you anywhere in the world. So it takes, for a leader or any person interested in building worldwide, it takes, first of all, a global perspective. You have to always realize that what we have here, if we can enjoy it, where there are parts of the world that don't have the same advantages. I see some places in Africa where if you don't have something like this, for example, well, people will die of things they shouldn't be dying of because of lack of facilities and equipment and proper medication. It's just, very tough to see sometimes. And something like us, we're not calling it medication, it's just nutrition. But again, in some parts of the world, this is their medication. You see, because they don't have anything better, because the medication and medical system is so poor. So when we're doing this business, we are, whether we see it or not, we are positioned to be global ambassadors of a hope. We can really, and if we think that way, then we are our heart, because if you don't think about it, if the heart doesn't have it in there, then you won't be open. You won't even see it. If you can see it, you can have it. So that's kind of how I would say very shortly, you get to, build internationally. It helps also to be interested in cultures. I don't mean that everybody has to learn a new language, but it helps, even if you don't necessarily have to learn a whole new language, but it helps to know a little bit of everything, to kind of be interested in cultures. Because sometimes I'm at the grocery store and I'll hear Romanians, somebody speaking Romanian. And depending on the how I feel bold that day, I may just go to them and be like, hey, you know, and speak in Romanian. I'll be like, oh, wow, you know, and then engage in the conversation. So I may hear people speak and I'm kind of like, okay, they may be from Poland or they may be from Hungary, you know, because I live in Eastern Europe. So I hear them speak and then maybe I'll go in there and I'll say a word, you know, like if I speak to a Polish person, at least I know how to say good morning and good night in Polish, you know, dzień dobry. And then they'll go, oh, you speak Polish. You know, I don't speak Polish, but, you know, for them, you feel like familiar now. You become like a brother just because you connected in a language. And in a lot of cultures, the language is so key to be able to just connect with languages. And sometimes it's random conversations, you know, talking about a popular dish in that country or that part of the world. And it's really just these little things. And us, because we are in the business of relationships, anything that can build a relationship, it could be around culture, language, you know, things that are common and all that in terms of, you know, if you know that something happened specifically in that area or that country and you know about it and you meet somebody from that area, well, you can now kind of, you know, engage in a conversation, you know, kind of using that angle just as an excuse, you know, to be able to talk into them. So that's, there's so much to say, but I would say in a very short, you know, compressed version, that's kind of how you position yourself to look at international.
Yeah, Popo, I'm glad you said that because, you know, first of all, I think people first of all are like, well, shoot, this guy's lived all over the world. There's no way I'd have a chance to build internationally. But the way you brought it back to really, you know, the United States, Canada, we're a melting pot, right? We've got people from so many different nationalities who come here and live here that you can just meet somebody and then they'll have the connection to someone overseas, right? So it's meeting those people and using those connections to get into those other markets. So I'm glad you brought that up because that was pretty key. That it doesn't have to be you having some experience, having lived in Italy, Romania, but it'd be someone you know who lives here in the United States, who's from Italy. And that could be your connection as well. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Absolutely. You see, for example, you want to build into Europe, or somebody who says, okay, I want to build in France, but they may be thinking, okay, I don't know any French, you know, person from France, for example. Well, your gateway to France is your Congolese or Cameroonian neighbor in your neighborhood, because they're from Congo or from Cameroon or from Haiti. They speak French. So if you're, you know, you have a neighbor who speaks French, you don't have to be from that nation, but you may tap into somebody from Cameroon who speaks French, you know, who's your neighbor. Then guess what? Well, he's got cousins in France. So through him, you get into France. And now that you're physically in France because of the, you know, the network of that contact of yours, then of course, you know, it spreads and then you can, you know, kind of take over the country. So the gateway to your international expansion is in your neighborhood.